everyone, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and it's been an ongoing theme of our show, I would say, since the very beginning, to talk about why things are gay
Why are
and
they gay?
why are they gay. And we are not the only ones who want to talk about why things are gay, because there is a amazing documentary now on Shudder called Queer for Fear.
Ugh. Queer for Fear, produced by the immaculate Brian Fuller.
So immaculate, yes.
Maybe we've mentioned him once or twice. Just no way of knowing.
No, I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows how we feel about this Fuller fellow.
No.
But yeah, you may remember that we mentioned this on the show back when we did our Midsummer Scream recap, because we mentioned that this was an upcoming project of Brian's, but it is now out. So officially, as we are recording, all 4 episodes have dropped and are available for you to listen to. I think this was a show that you and I were both really looking forward to, and I
Yes.
think I will think it's safe to say one that we both did in fact enjoy now that it is here.
Thoroughly
And we really
enjoyed.
wanted to just kind of chit chat about it. So, for those who don't know, Queer for Fear is a 4-part documentary series on Shudder that is exploring the evolution of horror through a queer lens. So, it is executive produced by Brian Fuller and Steakhouse, and it features just all kinds of writers, critics, directors, actors, just all sorts of kind of people involved in media talking about the history of horror and its queerness.
And just like the best, they got so many great people involved with this. Like all the people you could ever want to listen to
Yes.
talk about horror and queerness. It's so good.
Yes.
It's so good.
I was reading some of like the interviews and like the lead up to the show just to kind of
Hmm.
get a feel for it. And one of the bits that I loved the most is Brian was saying that it was meant to feel like you're at like a horror salon and you're hanging
Mm.
out with, quote, savvy horror art queers. And I'm like, yes, that is where I want to be. That is what I want to do. And
What's the address? Here I come.
this series definitely delivers on that. And I mean, I
Yeah.
think before we talk about the series itself, I gotta shout out the posters
Oh my
that they
gosh.
did.
So
Like
cool.
these advertising posters feature some fab drag queens. We've got Alaska, Ben de la Creme, Mayhem Miller. We have Leah Delaria dressed as Alfred
That's Alfred
Hitchcock,
Hitchcock.
which was so
So
good.
good.
So good. Just like these are such a vibe. I'm like, I want to hang these up in my house.
Yes. And then I believe the model's name is like Saturn Rising, that
Yes.
did the Grace Jones
The Grace
look.
Jones one, so good.
Oh,
Oh.
beautiful. Yeah, the posters, I would frame those and hang them in my
Mhm.
home. They're very, very cool. Great advertising. Definitely got me excited to watch. And I thought too was very cool. It was very purposeful. The characters that they chose to feature,
Mhm.
and like Dela Bendelcram, in certain episodes is in that werewolf drag
Yes.
versus when they're not, and like it's very purposeful why those characters are chosen and how that plays into what they're talking about in the series. It's really, really cool.
For sure. And I mean, I know we've already gushed a little bit about the guests that they had, but like you said, it was just such a who's who, and I really appreciated just the like all forms of diversity amongst the guests. Like
Hmm.
obviously we had people of different orientations, different gender expressions, different races, but also like you had some really young people, you had some older people, you have like a good variety of like what kind of your creative focus was. And
Yes.
it really felt like a really well-rounded like panel of people.
And really some cool features of like children of people
Yeah.
from famous horror films and things that offered a really unique perspective on some things. Um, yeah, and like you said, because you had people from so many different walks of the creative sphere, we got I thought, a really full dissection of queerness, not just from the watching of a film, but from its inception, its development, its writing, like every aspect
Yeah.
was really dissected well in a way that showed a really full picture of how queer people have shaped this genre and this industry. It was very, very well crafted.
Yeah, and I feel like as we're kind of talking about this, like it sounds like, oh yeah, it's this really interesting piece about like the theory of queer horror, but it's a very engaging and very lighthearted series. Like people are
Yeah,
definitely talking about serious topics, but bringing in a lot of humor, and just I felt like it was really approachable. Like it
definitely.
definitely felt like I am someone who went to school, who did English classes in college, so literary analysis is definitely something that I am very familiar with. But it didn't feel like it was like over the top at all. I felt like I think that that can be kind of intimidating to people sometimes, the sort of idea of like film theory or,
Yeah,
analysis.
it wasn't overly heady. Like it
Hmm.
was and because a lot of these people are like actors and I mean, yeah, they were coming at it from a place of like love and really like fun and yeah, I mean they're drag queens. Drag queens aren't
Yes.
heady. They're intelligent, but they're not going to sit there and like bore you about something. So no, it's
Yes.
yeah, approachable is a great word. I mean, you all know I have the attention span of a goldfish, and the episodes are like 45 to an hour long, depending on the episode. And they like captivated my attention. Like I was in it to win it. Like it was,
Yes.
I wanted, I didn't realize it was only going to be a 4 episode installment, and I'm honestly I'm sad.
I know.
I could
I'm
have
like, there's
watched
so much
12 more
more.
episodes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I definitely hope that it gets like the kind of response that makes Shudder say, "Oh, we should do a season 2 of this," because there's definitely so much more that you could explore here.
So go subscribe to Shudder and watch.
Right.
This is not spons,
I
but
know, I was about to say, I'm like, as I'm talking about this, I'm like, this is in no way sponsored or anything. It
no,
is
but
just a thing that me and Midge are very into.
yeah, well, and yeah, and if it gets a good turnout, I mean they did a deep dive, but they really only scratched the surface at the same time. So like there's
Mhm.
so much more that can be unpacked and talked about, and so hopefully because they did mark it as like season one. I noticed that. So
Yes.
that usually means there's an opportunity for season two there. So hopefully.
Mhm. Yeah. So I thought that maybe we could just like go through the episodes and like kind
Yeah.
of discuss the topics, like what we were most into, from each of those, and just kind of have a good old our own little queer for fear chit chat.
Yes.
So
Well, let
yeah.
me kick you right off the gate there
Hmm.
then, because let's talk about Mary fucking Shelley, bitch.
Hell yeah. That's the thing about this episode is like some of these I'm like, ooh, we could do whole episodes on many of these people and topics, and I'm sure
And
Mary
we
Shelley and
should, yeah.
Frankenstein will pop up in the
Hmm.
future. But yeah, she is the OG goth queen.
Yeah. And a bicon.
Yes, total bicon. Had no
Uh,
time for Byron shit. Just out here creating a new genre, kicking ass.
yeah, hussy tussying with
Yes.
that was my favorite part of this episode. So the first episode, we're talking about the foundations of horror,
Mhm.
really, like where the genre starts. So we're talking about like way pre film. We're talking Mary Shelley. We're talking Bram Stoker. Um, and yeah, the Mary Shelley bit, they're talking about how she had like written all these letters about, I believe it was her like quote assistant, Jane, as saying that she was like the most beautiful creature she had ever seen, and if Mary Shelley had been a man, she would have fallen in love with her instantly. And I was like, oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah. I loved like the letters in this episode.
Yes, me
Like
too.
it's so cool cuz obviously like throughout the series there's a lot of like really amazing like film clips,
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like, oh, like this is like the historical part. What are we going to do here? And they did include, clips from adaptations of some of these authors' work, but they also included like dramatic readings of some of these letters. And the letter that Bram Stoker wrote to Walt Whitman
To
broke
Walt
my
Whitman.
heart. Oh my gosh. Like, I know. So when we talked about Dracula, we did talk about Bram Stoker a bit, and, kind of the modern interpretation that he may have been a pretty closeted man, and he just wrote a letter of like such longing to Walt
Yes,
Whitman,
the
and
queerest longing I have
such
ever
queer
beheld.
longing. Oh, and it was just terrible. And it's and they talk about Oscar Wilde in the Portrait of Dorian Gray a fair amount
Yes.
in
Well, and
this.
how Oscar Wilde, like being publicly outed, kind of contributed to
Hmm.
Bram Stoker very possibly like retreating back into the closet in a
Yes.
really severe way. um, because you used to be able to be like banished and or killed for just being a gay person and being
Hmm.
alive. Um, which I guess there are still places in our world, unfortunately, that that's true. But
Oh yeah, but
I don't I
definitely
don't I don't mean to
yes.
make light of it as if like now it's all great and we're all happy. But yeah, no, that episode in particular was very interesting to me just because you know I I've seen a lot of people, interpreting writings of these people to like you said, kind of suggest that they may have been queer. But when you look at these historic like documents, these letters that they wrote themselves, there's really no it's no longer speculation. Like there's
Mhm.
really no denying the queerness that um existed there, and of course if that's part of who you are, of course it's going to seep into your writing and the way you exist in the world. And I don't know, this episode made me really emotional because
Mhm.
like this is something that we love so much, and to know that it's like, I mean, Mary Shelley literally created the genre.
Yep.
She made this, and for her to be a queer woman is very cool. And it literally, it's kind of like how you can't be pro LGBTQ without being like pro black women. Like,
Yeah.
they are the foundation. And so that's very cool because it's, to me, it's like you can't be a horror fan and not be pro gay. You really
Right.
can. We are the heartbeat of the creation of it, and that's so freaking cool.
Yeah, I feel like this episode just like dramatic. What am I demonstrated words. Uh
Demonstrated.
Demonstrated. It demonstrated how much queer, both like actual queerness as in like queer creators have been part of horror from the beginning, as well as just like this kind of forbidden nature of queerness has always been part of horror texts, and
Right. Yeah. And
kind
how
of.
like well, and yeah, just, I mean, I know we know it, but hearing it like said in that context of like horror is about being the other.
Hmm.
Like there's so much of, survival and otherness and like being misunderstood that creates these quote monsters. It's very inherently the queer experience. And yeah, oh, I love it. Go watch the show.
I know. I'm like, watch the show. I can't.
I need. Does anyone have a mountaintop I can scream from? Ugh.
Oh my gosh. And moving into episode 2, we do kind of jump ahead to horror cinema,
Mhm.
particularly Universal monsters, and as well as suspense drama. We talk a lot about some of Hitchcock's work and some of the very strange homoerotic subtext that you see throughout there, which I guess it was one of those things where I'm like, I've watched this movie, not like I have not seen Rope, I
Oh,
think
I
is
was gonna say, if you ever seen Rope, you
mm,
can't miss it.
no, and I was like watching that, I was like, wow, this is very gay. But I did see Strangers on a Train
Okay,
and
yeah, yeah.
in like high school probably. And watching it now, I'm like, how did I not see like how intensely gay this is?
Well, I think that was overall too the thing I really liked about this series. It's like sometimes certain people, Midge Munster, like you can really apply a queer lens to anything if you try
Oh
hard
yeah, for
enough.
sure.
but I didn't feel like this show was doing that. I didn't feel like
No.
they were taking everything they could grab and be like, and here's why this is gay. Like, it was all so well founded. And the Alfred Hitchcock stuff was very interesting to me because he's kind of a controversial player.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a huge fan of him as a human being. So it was interesting to delve more into like the what made him tick.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it was incredible to hear from Oz Perkins, Anthony Perkins' son, just
Yes,
kind
I
of
loved that interview.
about how much that impacted their family. And it was just, that was another part where I was like, this is so sad. My heart.
I know. It's heartbreak. Yeah. And like I I just kept thinking his wife, Anthony's wife, like what a goat.
I know.
Like because you so they get into talking if you haven't watched the series yet about Anthony Perkins who is Perkins, is that right?
Yeah.
My brain was like nope. Who is best known for playing Norman Bates in Psycho. How that film kind of both jump started his career and kind of destroyed his career
Yeah.
simultaneously because it really kind of showed a side to him that had not been shown. He was playing a lot of like handsome love interests and like
Yeah. Like
swoony.
leading man.
Yeah. And it kind of showed his more of his true nature, I think, is kind of the way they were expressing it in the series. And he was a closeted gay man.
I was going to say, not as a murderer, to be
Not as,
clear.
yeah, let's be clear. Well, and so that's the tricky thing too, then, is like this, a lot of queerness is being shown as villainous. Like
Yeah.
it's being synonymous. So yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, I thought this was especially interesting, and I was, I have been, of course, talking to people in real life nonstop about this documentary also,
Oh,
and being like, let
yeah.
me tell you about Queer for Fear. And
Literally giving seminars in friends' cars
right.
for
And
2 weeks.
just this idea that like it is still definitely present in Hollywood and media that like playing gay can be bad is bad for your career and that like it can
Hmm.
ruin you, but just that it was like so much more heightened in that time where it was just like, well, this guy played a weird dude who was seemed kind of gay once, so therefore
Yeah,
you
so
can't be
condemned.
a hero anymore. And it's just so awful when it's like it's called acting. Like the whole
Yeah.
point is to play something that you're not. And just
And it becomes like a
especially
real life like monster hunt. Like it's
right,
this like people bringing out their torches and pitchforks and being like, "We
right.
can't have him on the screen."
And like you said, just kind of like some of like this villainizing of queerness, and just the idea that it's like you could play, a murderer in a movie, but it's worse if it seems like you're gay.
Right.
So or like
Yeah.
playing a gay character would ruin you. And that's just really gross and not cool.
Was this also the episode where they talked about the director who directed Bride of Frankenstein?
Yes, that was next to my
This
thing. So
was
James
my
Whale, who
favorite.
I was not familiar with.
Yeah, so this is one of those moments for me where I feel like all the puzzle pieces in my brain clicked together because literally every single one of the Universal films he directed are my favorite films
Yeah.
of the monster movies, and I was like, "Oh, it's cuz they're gay."
Mm-hmm.
Like he directed it through an extremely queer lens, and like you said, it's kind of one of those things where you watch those things when you're young and you don't think anything about it, but like now as an adult and a person who is out, like I look back on that, I'm like, man, I saw something in that
Yeah.
that reflected myself back to me in some way that I really connected with. Um, and to be an out man in the 30s and 40s,
Right.
wow! Round of applause for James
For
Whale.
sure. Yeah, that was really really fascinating to me to learn more about him and hear about that. And it is just so interesting to kind of feel like you have a connection to a piece of media that you don't really understand why, and then at some future point when you understand yourself better and like are like, oh, I get it now.
Ah,
Ah.
the dots have been connected.
Yes. What did they? Is this the? Did they also talk about like body snatching in this episode, or was that in the
No,
next
I
one?
think that's the
Okay.
next one, but I do before we move on, I do
Yes.
also believe this was the episode where we talk about the Hays Code for the first time,
Yes.
and I had a real epiphany that I like again, one of those things I've been aware of and thought about a lot but didn't know the context or the history of. You know the term bury your gays.
Mm-hmm.
Like in film and media now, well, not necessarily as much now because people are more aware of it, but like especially in the 90s, watching TV shows and things. I mean, let's take Buffy for
Yep.
example, and Tara as just one example, but many examples I could think of where a queer character does not get to see the end of a show and has to die for some reason.
Especially lesbians.
Especially lesbians, yes, especially queer women. Um, and so they introduce in the second episode the Hays Code, which was like a series of laws instituted in Hollywood around, I believe it was, didn't they say around the 40s?
Mm-hmm.
Um, basically dictating what you could and could not show in
What's
films.
immoral to
What's
depict in
what's
film?
going to corrupt the moral culture? Yeah. Blech. Um, and one of the things that was specifically stated was that if you depicted any form of homosexuality, that character that expressed that in any way had to be either like quote punished or killed.
Mm-hmm.
What? Like
Yep.
I know that it was like that, but like when you hear it explicitly stated like that in a document that was
Right.
accepted by a huge conglomerate of people who are making the mass media that everyone is ingesting. What?
I know. It's wild to be like, "Oh, hey, we wrote down all the rules about what things are bad." And you look at it and you're like, "Oh, this sure does tell a lot about society, doesn't it?"
Yeah, and like 90% of it is like don't be gay and don't like and
Don't
now
be
here we
sexually
are
promiscuous.
and now here we are in fucking 2022 and it's the same thing, you know, like it's just
Mhm.
wild to see how history repeats itself and we've got like don't say gay bills popping up all over the place.
Yep.
It's like have we learned nothing? Have we learned nothing? It just ooh steams my beans.
Right. Flames on the side of my face.
Flames literally. Speaking of icons, but yeah, I was really just kind of again it was one of those moments where puzzle pieces connected to my brain and I was like oh
Mhm.
my god, like we're still
Yeah.
seeing the effects of that in the like bury your gays trope.
Yep.
It's just it's wild to me that
Yeah, I mean, it gets established as a
yeah,
cinematic trope, like, and
and it's just ingrained in us in a way we don't even realize how rooted and how deep it goes.
yeah, like I don't think most people today who or in the 90s or whatever who were writing stuff weren't just like, and now I will demonstrate that queerness is wrong by killing one of these queer people.
Exactly,
Like you
yeah,
don't,
that's not
and
the
it
intent.
it becomes so insidious that it's just part of like your standard language of
Right.
media
And
that
that's
you
like
don't even know why you're doing it anymore.
and that's scarier.
Mhm.
That like it's a subliminal thing that has been ingrained in us now that, you know, when you see a queer person die in a show, you don't think anything. You're like, "Oh yeah, I figured they would probably die because they're queer." Like
Yep.
and not in a malicious way, but like that precedent has been set.
Yeah, that's just something
Um
that happens.
so cut that shit out, everyone.
Right.
Stop burying your gays. We're
No
not
more of
interested.
that, please.
Actually,
Thank you.
actually, just make everybody gay in the show and no one dies. It's a horror movie where everyone lives and they're all gay. I love it.
There you go. I'd watch that. I'd watch that movie.
I think we do get to watch that actually. It's called Hey Neighbor, uh, coming out soon.
Ooh,
Allison Stoner is a part of it, and the whole cast is queer. So I'm very excited
nice.
about that.
All right, I'm into that. But yeah, the next episode, episode 3, is about kind of transformation, monsters, a lot about werewolves,
Hell
which
yeah.
as much of a vampire girl I am also extremely into werewolves.
Yeah,
So
I'm a real.
definitely look for future werewolf content on Ghouls Night In. But just kind of the allegory to queerness of this idea that there's something monstrous inside you that is forcing its way out, and that like you're going to try your best to conceal it, but in the end everyone is going to know that you're a monster, is just so
So good.
so relatable.
So relatable content. Well, and I loved, I mean, they really focused on the word transformation films
Mhm.
in this episode, which I loved. And they had Emily St. James talk a lot.
I love her so
I do
much.
too. Who is a trans woman, if you're unfamiliar with her. And she got to talk a lot in this episode about kind of the seeing yourself in these transformation films and like rooting for the monster more or less.
Yeah.
um and that was very cool because uh, I mean, having not had that particular queer experience myself, I wouldn't watch a werewolf movie and maybe think like, oh, this has like trans undertones, but it absolutely
Mhm.
does.
Yeah.
Like and can we talk other movies that I'm obsessed with that all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, it's gay. Ginger Snaps. Hi.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They brought up Ginger Snaps and I was like, oh my, here we go. Here we go. I can't. I'm so like, there's nothing I love more than something I already love than someone being like, well, you know why that's gay, right? And I'm like, tell me more.
What?
Give me the information.
Yes, I love it. And they, as I briefly alluded to, and I didn't know which episode it was because I was like, this could kind of fit into either of these. I don't 100% remember.
Mhm.
Just like as we've talked so many times about like moral panics and things, and just like kind of
Mhm.
the reaction of like this panic about queerness, presenting in like movies about body snatchers, movies about aliens, like this idea that like people might secretly be something terrible. And obviously that it can also definitely like there are a lot of lines to draw there with like communism, the Red Scare and stuff like that in America at this time, but also very much this idea that it's like someone could be a homosexual. Oh,
Ooh.
I don't know. That was like a Dracula. I don't know.
All homosexuals are just little ghosts. We're all
This
like,
is true.
ooh, we're here. Um, but the body snatchers part of this episode I thought was really compelling as well. So they talk about that entire franchise,
Yes.
um, and specifically through a lens of like the how those films really showcase the dangers of conformity
Hmm.
and how like haunting that can be when everyone's the same, and how, how it kind of, it never does it explicitly, but it kind of champions, you know, queerness and people who are different,
Yeah.
accidentally or maybe purposefully, by showing that how frightening conformity can be. And that really stuck with me from that episode, especially the, was it the 90s adaptation that specifically takes place on like a military base.
Oh yeah.
And they were like, well, this could have been kind of about, war and thing that was happening, but also it was released right after the implementation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So
Hmm.
it has like, whether they meant to or not, the context is there.
Yes, you can definitely connect those dots also.
Hmm. Yeah, I liked this episode a lot. There is something just really, I don't know. Surprised. You're going to be none surprised at all. I found myself very emotional watching this show.
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and
I I think I don't remember what it was called, but there was like they were talking about was it The Howling maybe, where it was like a commune of werewolves, and they
yeah.
were like, "Oh, all of these people live together in happiness and they have weird orgies." And I'm like, "I know that the point of this movie is that's bad, but like that sounds great."
It's very much to the point of you in the Satanic Panic episode,
Right?
where it's saying like, "Oh no, that sounds like you're making this thing sound awesome."
Right.
Like,
Don't take me to the werewolf commune.
oh no.
No.
Well, and outside of just which I think these things cannot be separated, but outside of just queerness as an idea too, the transformation films also very specifically deal with just like sexual liberation in general,
Yep.
and especially also where women or femme presenting people are concerned, which is something that people see as very dangerous as a
Yes.
sexually liberated femme person. And so that was um, really interesting because I am a firm believer that everybody is fluid in kind of both the sexuality and gender spectrum. I don't think we're born um, stuck in one way. And I
Hmm.
think it's, very much based on how we're raised and what we're fed and like media fed, not food. um, and
Well, I
so,
mean, if you eat Count Chocula, you're gonna end up gay. So
well, and I didn't even have Count Chocula. How did I
no,
get here?
I mean, it's not a requirement, but
Oh, okay,
like,
okay. I didn't even have Frankenberry stool, and I'm still queer. No, but I think it's interesting, kind of tying back, especially with the werewolf films, like this animalistic instinct,
yeah,
this return to our quote primal nature is rooted in queerness. It's what we are at our foundation, at our most basic primal instinct, is sexually free and romantically free to do whatever we want. And I find that beautiful, but it's fascinating how scary that is to some people. Like that
yeah,
there's fear rooted in the idea of liberation,
for
you
sure.
know?
I think that's a great segue to our final
It
episode,
sure is. This episode
which
was so
is all about women, sapphic desire in horror, sexual liberation. I just want to say, if anyone was like wondering, doubting that this was like not a network, not a
good. Oh,
network TV type of documentary, there are so many titties in this
boobies.
episode.
Boobies
There's
galore.
just boobaloobies all up in there.
Not boobaloobies.
Ooh,
Yeah, there were vampire titties all over the screen. I was not upset, but I was like, "Wow,
no, yeah, I was like, this is distracting in a good way.
please, sir, I'm trying to learn."
Right. I'm trying to be informed. This is a class. But yeah, and I mean,
This is a Wendy's. Like,
this is a Wendy's.
man, this is a
Uh,
Wendy's.
but this episode talks so much about kind of this idea of like sleaze and sexuality, which I thought was really interesting. And one of my like favorite kind of discussion points from this episode was sort of this idea that relates to all of these episodes, but this idea of exploitation versus representation,
Yeah.
and that when you don't have any like actual good representation of yourself, it's exciting to see yourself on screen even if you are being presented as a villain or as a bad thing. And that like so many of these movies
Or
of
as a
course have,
sexual object.
yes, just have like tons of like women making out, vampire ladies seducing random other ladies, crazy werewolf titties, and you're just like, well, I guess this is close.
Like, yeah, this is better than nothing, I guess. Yeah, so that is, and it's fascinating then how that informs our queerness and how we view ourselves. It's not just
Mhm.
about how other people view us, but about how, when you are presented, when the only representation you see, especially as a queer femme, like, is kind of this hypersexualization of yourself and objectification,
Mhm.
how that really informs your everything, how you interact with your own queerness, and that can be really damaging. um so yeah, I loved this episode. I
Me too.
really did. And we very so rarely see queerness dissected from a femme point of view,
Mhm.
not just in films but in like research.
Yes.
So the fact that there was a whole hour-long episode dedicated to queer women I was like screaming again, give me a mountaintop, please. I was so excited.
Right. I know. I'm like I had been excited throughout because like it certainly wasn't there were discussions of queer women and including
Yeah,
women's experiences throughout it all, and I was like, yes, awesome. Like it's so good to like see some of this, and then to be like, here, and for dessert, it's an entire cake just for you. And I'm like, what? For
And for
me?
you, a big old bowl of lavender haze to wrap up the yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it was great. And sorry, wait, do you have more to say about the vampires?
No, no, go
Okay.
on.
So yeah, and this beautiful dissection of like the haunted house films and
Yes.
the gay ghosts. um Specifically, they started looking at films like The Uninvited, and talking about, this idea of a disembodiment almost of
Hmm.
queer folk, and like them existing but not being able to be seen. That was um a very interesting viewpoint, and like talking about, it wasn't The Uninvited. What was the other? Well, they talked about Rebecca.
Yes.
Maybe it was The Uninvited, the one where the gal's mom dies and then she's living in the house. And okay, so this was exciting because there's a character in it, whatever film it was. There's a character in it who is a very queer female character named Theo,
Hmm.
who like wears these long gloves, and I was like, oh my god, Haunting of Hill House.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
there's our queer history. Because if you have not seen Haunting of Hill House, Theo is a queer character, and that as well, and wears gloves to uh, help with sensory overload in her surroundings.
So many
Yeah,
connections.
I was like, look at that gay history right there in front of me. But that film that they were talking about was really, really interesting to me, because they said something that resonated with me specifically about how she herself was the haunted house, like,
Yeah.
because she was like a stranger to herself in her own body. And I was like, whoa.
Mhm.
Somebody make shirts that say gay people are a haunted house. I'll buy that. But I think that's an experience we can all really relate to, of like having this moment of kind of waking up in your shell
Yeah.
and realizing that something is amiss or different, and feeling estranged from yourself a little bit, feeling unfamiliar and not really knowing how to navigate that. And it can be really, I mean, being queer, especially as a young person, is very scary. Like, it's a really haunting experience when you don't have representation. You don't really know what it looks like to be what you are.
Something, so this was not part of this episode specifically. This is kind of about the series as a whole, and just kind of a general question. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, when I was reading some of Brian Fuller's commentary, kind of in interviews, like press stuff leading up to this, was talking about like how it is certainly important to have like good and realistic representation. But he was saying that he kind of misses like the subtext of a lot of
The
this,
coding of it.
the coding. And I think that I can relate to that too. And just kind of the idea that like once something is set in stone, there's so little room to like wiggle around it.
Yeah.
And like I do certainly want to have like queer characters and things like that, but sometimes these days it can feel like very tokenizing, that it's like, all right, we put a queer thing in, done.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of, it also in some ways feels prohibitive of like imagining queerness or interpreting queerness, because it's like, well, no, we already told you it's right over here in this box. None of this other stuff is queer. And you're like, but I want it all to be queer.
Sure. And yeah, and I mean, there is something to be said for when it is coded. I mean, it's kind of like like hanky code, right? Like,
Yeah.
like queer people had their own secret language to talk to each other and to find each other in this coding of characters and writing and things. And it did also, when you're looking at a character like like in Bride of Frankenstein, like, they're kind of these ethereal otherworldly characters that expands queerness outside of sexuality, which makes it which is how I feel as a queer person. It doesn't really, to me, my queerness doesn't feel like just about who I'm attracted to or who I
Hmm.
sleep with or whatever. It's more about how I exist and how when I walk through when I walk down the street in Kansas City, Missouri, I look like I've broken out of the simulation compared to other people. That's my queerness to me. And so, yeah, I definitely see that I think like that representation of queerness is going to get muddled in the like focusing more on seeing a specific type of queerness represented.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think kind of along with, like, I think very much relating to that, like, for me, a lot of the times, like, I think of my queerness as something that is inherently undefined and
yeah,
undefinable. Like, I
we
obviously,
like to
like,
think of ourselves as special.
I like to think
Yes.
of myself as undefinable. But I mean, like, obviously, like, there are labels for reasons. There are labels that I identify with at various points. But like at the center of it, like, I feel like I'm not a specific thing necessarily, and that
You walk
part
out
of
in the street every morning, you say, I am unwritten.
I am outside the lines.
I'm
Uh,
undefined, baby.
but that part of being queer is kind of can be about eschewing those kinds of definitions. And I
Mhm.
think I think that is something that I see a lot in media that is produced by queer people, that it's often sometimes things remain unspoken and it's not necessarily someone, but it's hard because, of course you have that awful trope where um they try and portray like a bisexual woman a lot of
Ugh.
times on TV, and she's like, "Oh, I'm flexible or I'm whatever." And it's like you can just say bisexual or say queer or pan or whatever. So like that resistance to it is not what I am talking about. More,
Right.
I mean, not to talk about Brian specifically again, and I will
I
talk
was
about
gonna
this at
say it.
some point, but
I
Will
was
and
gonna.
Hannibal's relationship throughout the show is deeply queer.
Yeah.
It's explicitly queer without them being like, "Hi, I'm gay and I'm in love with you," or "I didn't know I was gay, but now I'm in love with you, and also you maybe want to eat me." That's kind of weird. Um, it doesn't have to. It can be presented in a way where it doesn't have to be spoken, and I will say that I do appreciate that form
Well,
in
and I think
addition to the out and proud.
right. Well, and I mean, yeah, I was gonna bring that up as well. Just Brian in all of his, there are no like quote queer characters in Pushing Daisies.
Yeah.
Um, but that show, when you watch it, you know it's made by a queer person.
Oh yeah.
Everything about that show is so queer. It's rich and thick and like excessive in every way. Like the wallpaper and the carpet and the bedding are all made out of the same fabric. Like that's gay. Like like that's queerness. And I love the just the richness that a queer creator puts in something. And so, yeah, you can definitely communicate a height of queerness without ever having to, have someone coming out on a
Hmm.
show or what have you.
Yeah, and whether it's a positive or a negative thing, this kind of, as we've seen throughout this entire series, this like history of subtlety and references is part of our history, and it's part
Right.
of our culture. And I think that is like
And
there
it's
are
intelligent, man. That's the
yeah.
other like queer people are freaking smart. Not all of us. Some of us are bimbos, me. No. Uh but yeah, no, it's very cool. It's very, very cool.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's a very good documentary. It obviously sparks a lot of thoughts that you could have for your own queer salon with your own smart art queers.
Yes, watch
And
this either with people or have them watch it and then get together and have a conversation.
yeah, or
Um,
host a podcast about it so you
or
can talk to your queer friends
or
about it.
talk to all your ghouls about it. Well, and honestly, what I would love, because I do think this is very approachable in so many ways, show this to your straight friends, man.
Yeah.
Like, really, like, let people understand the history that they are standing on when they, ingest horror media. Like, it is so, like I said, it's so important for us to start having these conversations about how you cannot be a fan of like blank without supporting blank, you know?
Yeah. And
um,
I'll say one of the things that I think makes this a good option, like a good 101 option for, like you said, straight friends, people who maybe, or queer people who aren't that into like film or stuff like that, is it's just such a joyful series.
yeah.
Like everyone is really excited to be there and to talk about it. Like it's not like dark and dour, even though like we said, we got emotional about it, but that's just
Well,
those are our
yeah.
own emotions. It's not, the show is not like angsty.
No, but I do think watching it as a queer person, you'll feel things, you know,
Yes.
like, which is
Yes.
what's beautiful about it. It's fun, it's camp, but it's also heartfelt, and it's a
Yeah.
real love letter to queer people and to their contributions. And I'm hoping for a part two, man. Here's what I'm gonna say: that last episode. So throughout the entire series, we have the director of Jennifer's Body as one
Yes.
of the commentators. And we get to that whole last episode about queer female cinema, and there was not one thing said about Jennifer's Body in this entire series. And I said, I'm gonna say they're saving that for round two.
I hope
I can't
so.
wait. Give me a whole episode dissecting Jennifer's Body. Um, but yeah, I really hope, like, yeah, share this with everyone you know so that we can get a season two. We need it. We love it.
Yes. Uh Obviously we've talked a little bit longer than usual about it, but we had a lot of feelings.
Well, and I feel y'all usually love one of these chatty episodes now and
It's
again,
true.
so I'm very glad. Penny texted me a couple days ago and was like, "Do you want to do a review of Queer for Fear?" And I was like, "Literally more than I want to breathe. That's what I want to do." Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So we definitely want to hear what you think about the series if you've watched it. What was your favorite episode? Was there a piece of queer history that was new to you? We would love to know. Feel free to leave that over in the comments on our Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you are enjoying our show, even a fraction of the amount that we enjoyed Queer for Fear, we would love for you to leave a review or a rating on your podcast app. And I believe Midge has a review to share with us today.
I do. Yeah, please leave us a 47-minute long
Yes.
rave review as we have for Queer for Fear. Well, this review is from somebody whose username I cannot read because it is in, I believe, Japanese. But it is a 5-star review titled "Officially Obsessed."
Ooh.
Found Midge's YouTube channel last week. Oh, hey, welcome. And have been binging all her videos, which of course led me here to the podcast, and I have been hooked ever since. It's just spooky enough to satisfy me, but so spooky. Oh, not so spooky that it makes me anxious like some other podcasts I've listened to in the past. I honestly think Penny and Midge both are so funny and have great chemistry. Love the show and glad I found it. Keep up the good work. Sincerely, a new glamour ghoul.
Aw, thank you,
Thank you
friend.
so much. That's what we aim for. A fun approach to spooky that isn't gonna ruin your day.
Yes. So, like I said, you can join us on Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod to keep up with what the podcast is up to. And if you are looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Penny Snark.
And you can find me everywhere at Midge Munster.
And until next time,
Good.
good.